Chapter 1188 ends with a sword right through the chest of Luffy. Now this isn't the typical glaive weapon that Imu was carrying through his entire invasion of Elbaf. Instead, this was a blade that he reached backwards and pulled out of a burning ring of eyes, which floats behind him. The second the sword left the ring, the land around Luffy began to die. Grass transforms into a grey colour, full-grown trees withered where they were stood, as it seems like a portion of Elbaf's forest gave up its life so that this weapon could exist in the open air. Then Imu closes the distance between himself and Luffy within the blink of an eye as he runs his sword through the torso of Luffy's strongest form. Oda gives the blade a name box, the kind that he saves for moments he wants you to remember. Vohu, the kanji underneath, is Kyomu, which means nothingness. The official English release names it the Blade of Nothingness Vohu. Vohu and Vohu are the same word. The true name of this sword was decoded within seconds by dedicated fans. It's Hebrew from the second verse of Genesis, Tohu wa Bohu, the formless emptiness the world sat in before creation began, before light was even a concept. Hebrew doesn't romanize cleanly into English, so the fan translations went with B while Viz went with V. Gear 5 Luffy, the awakened sun god, was put down by a weapon that was named after the state of the universe before anything existed. While he's hanging off of Imu's sword, Imu states, "It is clear thou art not Joy Boy. Joy Boy would never be this weak." In this video, I want to argue that the weapons Imu is using are in fact dead gods. Some of the information about this theory is printed within the manga and some of it is interpretation. Hopefully by the end of this video, you won't look at Imu's weapons the same again. While the world government loves scrubbing names from the pages of history, do you know whose names will never be scrubbed out of history? These are the individuals who are subscribed to the channel. Only 10% of the people who watch these videos are subscribed, so if you enjoy the content and want to see more, then hit the bell icon and the subscribe button for even more videos just like this. At the end of chapter 1186, Loki calls Imu a coward for using Elbaf's children as leverage. Imu's reply is really disturbing, as he states the giants lost a war 800 years ago because they stopped to save their children. When Luffy arrives, he sucker punches Imu one page later, freshly refueled from emptying the Walrus School's kitchen, yelling at the king of the world to get off of the island. Fans immediately clocked the visual echo of Luffy decking St. Charlos back at Shabodi. In chapter 1187, Imu doesn't even reach the ground before conjuring two omens, the black flames that he claims sleep inside every living thing, as he fires them mid-flight. Imu's powers stem from the Akuma no Mi, the devil's fruit, as it has no model or species. One flame lands on Loki and it does something new as it crawls across his body, settles into the chest wound left behind an earlier sword strike, and then Imu speaks a name, Stigma, which is the blade of hatred. A homing sword of black fire follows the mark and punches clean through the strongest giant alive. Luffy watches all of this as he notices the same flame sitting on his own jacket, as he counters Imu's ability by throwing his jacket away. Meanwhile, Ragnia hops off of the injured Loki as it fusses over its master in squirrel form, and it accidentally starts melting the ice block holding Gunko, which nobody on the battlefield notices, even including Imu. Elsewhere on the island, Zoro squares up with Summers at the western village port, and Summers greets him by gloating that Zoro has no idea how strong he and Killingham have become since Imu powered them up. Sanji finds Killingham's rain goddess physically carrying children away, but he then realizes that the rain god has a beautiful woman's face, so he cannot bring himself to kick it. So the only option that he has left is to run through Killingham himself, an immortal whose creations vanish if he falls, and whose one confirmed weakness is Supreme King Haki. Now this is where we get a replay of Gaban's diagnosis that Sanji has the potential for Supreme King Haki, but he is blocked by his own masochistic instability. So if he wants to help make Luffy the Pirate King, he has to first acquire Supreme King Haki himself. At the center of the island, Luffy goes Gear 5 as Imu greets the transformation by referring to him as Joy Boy. Luffy is visibly annoyed as he corrects him, stating that he is the future Pirate King. This sets us up for the most recent chapter 1188. The chapter opens 800 years in the past as we learn that Imu's first ever contact with Joy Boy happened remotely. Back in the present, Imu wraps his arm in black flame and throws a punch that turns corners because the flame steering it is in fact alive. He teleports out of counters and blocks full punch barrages on the shaft of his staff. Luffy shreds a wave of homing flames with a jet gatling, and then debuts Gomu Gomu no Majin, a colossal genie form. He also dedicates the new form to avenging Loki, who has to yell up at him that he is not actually dead. Loki is being protected by Jinbei, who deflects almond blasts off him with his fishman karate. Nami asks the crew, who is this? The only explanation that Brook can offer is that above the God Knights are the 5 elders, because the world government is the most mysterious organization in history. Imu, mid-combat, hears Brook call the frozen Gunko Shuri and freezes in a very different way, because he realizes that the skeleton in front of him is the same squire that he watched get executed in Esperia 62 years ago. Luffy takes advantage of the opening and fires an attack as Imu blocks it with ease and sticks an almond to the Margin's beard as a parting gift. Luffy has to drop the form entirely to dodge another Stigma. A flock of homing flames follow him across the battlefield as Vohu comes out of the halo. The forest begins to die, and with the cover deleted, there's nothing left between Imu and a straight line as he teleports and stabs Luffy. The last 3 chapters of One Piece did quite a lot to establish the stakes. Both inheritors of the god fruits on Elbaf have now been formally introduced to Imu's named weapons. Loki took on judgment and hatred, Luffy took nothingness. Each blade within Imu's collection was introduced by tasting the blood of a inheritor of a god fruit. All of the legendary swords of One Piece that we've been introduced to so far are Japanese in name, like Wado Ichimonji, Enma, Shusui. Even weapons owned by characters from clearly non-Japanese cultures obeyed this naming convention. Imu's weaponry changes this, as Nemesis is Greek, Gram is Norse. Tzitzimitl is straight out of Aztec belief, Stigma derives from Greek Christian tradition, Vohu is biblical Hebrew. These are 5 weapons stemming from 5 different belief systems. Oda sprinkles mythology on attack names constantly. Sanji cooks with Diablo Jambe, Enel through El Thor around Skypiea. Half of Zoro's techniques reference demons and deities. If a foreign name proves anything, then its every third character would be a god killer. The thing is, the names of Imu's weapons have been carefully curated. Now listen to how the official titles of his weapons sound when you read them in a row. Blade of Judgment, Blade of Wrath, Blade of Hatred, Blade of Nothingness, plus Gazing Eclipse, whose Japanese name reads closer to Solar Eclipse Bombardment, and the Japanese behind Nemesis is blunter still, roughly Blade of Divine Punishment. Imu has a strange relationship with names themselves. He addresses Rocksteady Zebek as Davy Jones. He addresses Luffy as Joy Boy. To Imu, nobody new has been born in 800 years. The faces that he sees today are from the old enemies that he faced 800 years ago. He labels every person under the will that they carry rather than the life that they're currently living. If he's this particular in the way that he addresses people, then there must be a reason why he has picked these names for his weapons. Also, when you look at the way Nerona Imu is written in katakana, the strokes of Nerona can be reassembled into the kanji for God, and the 2 characters of Imu are the broken off components of the kanji for Buddha. Japanese fans have read the name as a shattered god and a shattered Buddha hiding in plain sight. There is also a plain verb reading, Imu, which exists in Japanese, and it means to shun, to detest, or to treat as taboo. Then there's the Nero of it all, since Nerona sits 1 letter away from the Roman emperor remembered for burning his own capital and pinning it on the people that he persecuted. In 2003, Oda drew a ritual. Within chapter 287, deep within the flashback of Skypiea, we see the Shandians praying for salvation from disease, and the prayers go to 4 specific addresses: the sun god, the rain god, the forest god, and the earth god. Most readers treated it as background lore, which was understandable when the arc's actual antagonist was a man cosplaying as God with drums on his back. The chapter was titled God Killing, and this was 23 years ago. Chapter 1044 confirmed what the world government actually did about the sun god. The Gorosei admits that Luffy's fruit was never the Gomu Gomu no Mi at all, but it was the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, a name that was erased from history following the supposed defeat of the sun god. In chapter 1138, Robin reads the Harley, an ancient text claiming that the world has already been destroyed twice. These catastrophes that led to the end of the world narrates how gods were warring, including a line about man killing the sun and becoming God himself. Chapter 1130 reveals what divinity has been reduced to on Elbaf. where the sun god appears to be a vacant title which Loki loudly claims for himself and half of the island grows up daydreaming about. Chapter 1182 reveals to us Zaza, the rain god, as she lives on as a horror story told to the celestial dragon children, a monster from the lower world that dumps water on your head, as she only takes physical form on Elbaf because Killingham's power turns his own childhood nightmares into flesh. Chapter 1175 reveals Elbaf's national treasure, which is the fruit of the warrior god, the previous wielder of the Nidhogg power, a figure who battled Nika himself, whose companion Rototska moved into the hammer Ragnir after its master died and guarded the fruit for centuries. Imu recognizes them. When Loki transformed, Imu smiled at the sight and called the Nidhogg a traitor. You cannot be betrayed by a stranger. He looked at Ragnir and mused about how long the little creature had waited to find a new master. He talks about the beings in Elbaf scripture the way that you talk about old acquaintances. In chapter 1183, Imu tells Luffy and Loki that they resist his corruption the same way Dozan once did, and that he ended up destroying Dozan for it, a name that One Piece has never revealed to us before, belonging to someone immune to Domi Reversi, the technique which broke Rocksteady Zebek. So when you begin to put everything together, we learn that gods verifiably existed within the world of One Piece. The world government's signature move is deleting their names from the records of history, and Imu, the government's hidden ruler, walks around with an arsenal of weapons that are named after gods from 5 different faiths. In Norse mythology, a one-eyed stranger walks uninvited into a king's feast and drives a sword into the living tree that holds up the roof of the hall. Whoever can pull it free, he says, can keep it. Every warrior in the room fails except for one, Sigmund of the Volsungs, as well as the stranger who is revealed to be Odin all along, who lets him carry that blade through a lifetime of war before personally shattering it in Sigmund's final battle. The shards pass to his widow, who keeps them for the son Sigmund never met, a dwarfsmith named Regan, who reforges them into a weapon sharp enough to cleave the anvil it was made on and part a tuft of wool the river carries into its edge. With that reforged sword, the boy Sigmund kills Fafnir. Fafnir, if you don't know the story, started out as Regan's brother, a dwarf who murdered his own father over a cursed hoard of gold, then guarded it so jealously that the greed physically rebuilt him into a serpent. That sword is Gram, the definitive dragon-slaying blade of Norse mythology, and in Old Norse grammar, which literally translates to wrath. So Viz printing Blade of Wrath Gram in chapter 1182 is a faithful translation of the sword's actual name from the Norse mythology sagas, rather than just being a dramatic title that Oda invented. Imu draws this weapon against Loki, the man carrying the Ryuryu no Mi model Nidhogg. Nidhogg, in the same Norse tradition, is the dragon coiled at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, chewing away at creation from underneath, his name tangled up with Ragnarok itself. On the island, which Oda based off of Norse myth, while under the shadow of the world tree up against the inheritor of the Norse dragon, Imu's hand went to the one weapon in human storytelling whose entire reputation is built upon killing Norse dragons. Twin blades of dark flame at both ends of his pole arm swung in a circle to cut Loki's lightning out of the sky. Fafnir and Nidhogg are 2 different dragons, and Gram never really touches Nidhogg within Norse mythology. Oda here has fused the sword that slays dragons with the dragon of the world tree. Oda still chose the dragon slayer's name, translated its meaning correctly, and deployed it against a dragon. In chapter 1181, we saw Nemesis, a cross-hilted greatsword driven down through Loki from above. Pop culture reduces Nemesis into goddess of revenge, but the Oda reading is about hubris. It's a specific crime of mortals reaching for what belongs to the gods. Her name grows out of the Greek verb nemein, which is to distribute or hand out what is owed. Who on Elbaf crossed a line that a god needs to restore by intervening? Well, this is Loki, who sat chained in the underworld for 6 years and introduced himself to Luffy as the sun god who will end the world. As a mortal, Loki is wearing the title of a god, and the first named blade out of Imu's arsenal is the one whose whole job in mythology is answering this very crime. Fans have talked to death how similar Nemesis looks to the sword of Mihawk Yoru. Then you've also got the ring dyes of Imu, which are very similar to Mihawk's too. Then there's the weapon Tzitzimitl, which isn't a blade at all. Gazing Eclipse, the ring behind Imu swells and rains down burning demon heads. Within Aztec belief, these Tzitzimitl are star deities in the shape of skeletal women, led by the obsidian butterfly. They are the stars that become visible around the sun during an eclipse, and that visibility was read as an assault, the stars closing in to devour the sun, and humanity with it if the light ever failed for good. Their imagery crowds around the sun god's eclipse-stricken face on the Aztec sunstone. So an attack that is named after beings that eat the sun during an eclipse was fired at the man who announces himself as the sun god. The weapon Stigma is the nastiest of the set once you unpack it. In the classical world, a stigma was a mark seared into the skin of criminals and slaves so everyone would know what they were. In Christian tradition, the stigmata are the 5 wounds of the crucifixion, the 5th being the spear wound in the side from the lance in John's Gospel, driven in by a soldier the text never names. If you look at Imu's version, first there's a living flame which settles on you and marks you. This is the brand. Then a homing blade appears and impales you through the body. You can see how Imu's specific weapons behave like they were forged for specific kills. Behind Imu's head floats a ring of black fire, and set into that ring are 16 eyes, every one drawn identical to Imu's own. Fans have been calling it a halo since the reveal, and mostly treating it as decoration, but in chapter 1188 we see it serve a specific purpose. The weapon Vohu didn't materialize out of his polearm like his other weapons. He reached into the ring and drew the sword out of it. Whatever that thing is, it has contents. In the book of Ezekiel, the prophet describes wheels within wheels moving beside 4 living creatures, and the rims of those wheels are, quote, full of eyes all around. The Hebrew word for them is Oppenheim, literally wheels. It took hundreds of years of Christian scholarship to decide what those wheels actually were, eventually settling on the answer that they were the thrones, the 3rd highest choir of angels, the living bearers of God's own seat. Medieval artists took this idea and ran with it, painting burning rings crowded with eyes. The thrones are the angels that are a throne, and Imu is the man whose deepest secret is that he sits on the empty throne of the world. The seat built for the purpose of remaining vacant so that no one person rules the world. Odin strapped the throne angels to this man's back and filled it with his own eyes. This visually is a confession of the crime that he has committed, hovering behind his head. There's also a theory floating around that each of the 16 eyes represents a different power or weapon, so you could think of it as a selection dial. The ring is storage, a vault he wears, and the number on it matters because Japanese wordplay reads Imu's own name as digits, I which is 1 and Mu which is 6. Put this together, it's 16. 16 eyes on the ring, and when the Mother Flame weapon annihilated the Luzia, count the beams that came down from the sky. There are 16. Oda's been carefully revealing subtle details about Imu gradually within the story, and there may be a reason why he has these 16 eyes on the halo. So what does Imu keep in his storage? We do actually have an answer for this from the manga, and it's everything that he defeats in one form or another. Imu is someone who keeps a giant straw hat in a private frozen chamber. He has a portrait of Nefertari Lily, a woman he despises, hanging where he can look at it 800 years after her death. He was also introduced to us slicing up the wanted posters of the current generation's threats. His covenant system converts loyal humans into controllable assets. Domi Reversi flips defeated enemies into his own demons that he can control. Everything Imu owns used to be someone. Everything about him appears to run on the principle of acquisition. Via Ragnia, the hammer of the warrior god, we learn something important. When its master died, Rototsuka's spirit moved into the weapon weapon and stayed there for centuries, waiting and guarding, until a worthy wielder revealed themselves. Chapter 1170 establishes that the hammer consumed a devil fruit, the Risu no Mi model Rototsuka. This is a sentient weapon housing the companion of a dead god. The stories already taught us that when a god dies in this world, something of them can live on inside a weapon. Then this inhabited weapon was greeted by Imu like an old acquaintance. And then conveniently Imu pulls out a god-named blade out of one of the ring eyes. So Oda naming these swords after gods may be more than just giving them empty labels, especially since these weapons were introduced next to the one weapon we know which is sentient and in possession of a devil fruit. If you look at Imu's sword in action, Vohu doesn't cut things, it repeals them. The grass didn't burn and the trees weren't felled. The land was returned to a state before life had happened to it. We all read the Void Century as the century that we can't see. It's a gap in the records. But if you flip the grammar, what if the century was voided itself? Under this reading, the Void Century stops being a simple gap in history and it becomes a procedure. Somebody ran Genesis in reverse order over an era, unmade its beings and kept their names where only he can read them, on his blades. So there could be collected relics from the gods that Imu has defeated. Or alternatively, the blades are manifestations of the Akuma no Mi, conjured out of Omen in real time. But remember, in chapter 1188, every other weapon has come off of the pole arm or out of the grimoire of Imu's, but Vohu came out of the halo, the only thing on his body we have actually watched store something. There's also the precedent of Ragnia, which confirms that dead gods leave residue in weapons, thus transforming them into sentient weapons that can even devour devil fruits. Vegapunk told us in chapter 1069 that the oldest text depicts Nika carrying a long spear. While Elbaf's giants drew him with sword and shield, the sun god was always armed. If you look at the weapon Imu never puts away, it's the one he walked onto Elbaf holding, a long pole arm whose pommel he has already reshaped into a cannon, a mace along with a sword staff and a flail. If the logic of his arsenal holds, the item to worry about is the one he leads with, the weapon that has never needed a name. If that glaive ever gets an introduction box of its own, I think we learn who it's taken from, as this may be the weapon of the sun god. There are a ton of interesting details after having read chapter 1188 and going into the latest chapter releasing this week, 1189. We've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to you. Which god do you think each blade came from? And who was Dozan? Which mythology does the sixth blade that Imu may eventually draw come from, if it does exist? And is the halo behind Imu's head a storage device, a weapon rack, or something worse? If there's anything that I've forgotten to talk about, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next One Piece video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.